Good morning and welcome to day 6 of New Year Nourish You. These days are flying by and I hope everyone is feeling well rested. I myself am actually not feeling well rested, so I'm feeling like a bit of a walking contradiction after talking about restful sleep and then having a bit of a later night than I normally would. But it's all perfect because it's also playing into the theme of today, which is emotional health. And something I realized this morning when I woke up after a few hours sleep, not as many as I would normally aim for, I felt grumpy. And I was like, oh, how perfect that I'm grumpy on the morning that we're talking about emotional health. This is like a beautiful segue into seeing how our healthy habits impact our emotions and vice versa. And this is why emotional health is such an important part of health, because if we don't deal with our emotions, we can't fully be healthy because it leads to distraction techniques and protection strategies like things like emotional eating or binge scrolling or binge watching TV, all those kinds of things. But the same goes the other way. If we're not focusing on our healthy habits and doing the things that help us feel good and help us feel regulated and support with emotional health, we can see an impact on our emotions as well. So in my case now, I've had less sleep last night and therefore this morning I woke up feeling grumpy. Is it bad that I'm feeling grumpy? It's all subjective, right? Nothing means anything until you give it a meaning. So while we can associate grumpy with one of more of those uncomfortable or quote unquote negative feelings, I really don't believe that there are any negative emotions. And yes, there are some that feel more uncomfortable, but doesn't make them a bad thing, right? We give them that label. If we choose to call them a bad thing, then that's on us. That's a story we're creating about them. They're not actually good, bad. They're all just neutral. And we give the pleasurable and positive emotions a good meaning, right? We're like, yes, I love feeling happy and I love feeling joyous and I love feeling excited and I love feeling the feeling of love. And like we have all these kind of like positive associations with those kinds of things. But then things like sadness or anger or frustration or grumpiness or grief, even all of these ones we kind of associate as quote unquote negative emotions because they feel more uncomfortable. And the more we can get comfortable with the uncomfortable, the more we can see that our emotions are here to serve us. Our emotions actually are messengers and they have messages for us. They're there for a reason. When we start to create that relationship with our emotions and explore them, we can actually set ourselves free on so many levels because the suffering is in the resistance of different emotions. So this morning I could have woken up and I could have been like, oh, okay, I'm noticing I'm a bit grumpy and irritable because I've had less sleep, and I could see that as bad and then I could try and stuff that down. Or I could just be like, okay, I see you, I hear you. Why am I feeling grumpy? What's going on here? And start to question that and allow that part of me to feel seen and heard as well. Because there's a part of me underneath that grumpiness that's probably just sad because I didn't get as much sleep as I desire and that I really value sleep. So when my sleep is compromised, it does feel upsetting. But of course, life happens, and I'm not going to say no to going to beautiful events like the one I was at last night. So it's just sitting there being with that part of myself and being like, it's okay that I feel grumpy. And I know that's going to pass too, because all emotions pass and emotions are energy in motion and they move through us, especially when we know how to feel them and process them and sit with them and hear the messages they have for us. And this is an important distinction as well, because we don't want to go straight to the message from the emotion, right? We also want to allow it that time to be felt. So often in kind of like the personal development world or the spirituality world, it's kind of like focus on feeling good and like just find the message. What's the silver lining? Why is this happening for you? Why is it coming up? Whereas I really believe there is so much value in sitting with the emotion first and processing the emotion before we find the lesson, right? Because unless we allow that emotion, energy in motion, to move through us, it will store in our body. And then we end up getting different ailments and different injuries and things. And that can be because we're holding on to a lot of stress, a lot of emotion, a lot of past trauma. And there's some incredible books about this kind of stuff. You could read something like The Body Keeps Score, which talks about how the body is like a scorecard for our life and everything that's happened to us. And when we don't know how to release things like trauma or different emotions, then it just gets trapped in our body and it can lead to injuries and things like that. And there's many like that. There's also When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate, and Gabor Mate in general is really insightful on topics of like trauma and this kind of like body emotion connection. But yeah, there's a few different resources you can go if you're interested in learning more about that. But even just the experiential rather, perspective of just give it a try and see how you feel. See how you feel when you actually learn to process your emotions and move them through you, compared to probably a lot of our life when we haven't processed our emotions and we haven't sat with ourselves and had this healthy relationship with our emotions. Because what can happen is, as I mentioned earlier, if we're not feeling them, when we're either bypassing them, we're either maybe distracting ourselves, we're turning to the food and eating our feelings instead, it's like we're carrying around this emotional baggage, this emotional weight, and it feels heavy and it feels exhausting. And you probably like can relate to this feeling of like when you've just like, you feel like you're carrying the world on your shoulders. The more we can actually start to just like observe and be with our emotions and allow them to move through us, the more we can work through that emotional baggage and let it all go. And it's really, really powerful stuff. There was something I was going to say about that. So what I was saying about the not bypassing the feeling, really, really don't want you to underestimate the power of that. And yes, we want to eventually find the lesson. That's great. And sometimes there is no lesson. Sometimes it's just an emotion that's there and it just wants to be acknowledged. But really just starting to think about those times where the suffering is in the resistance. So for example, if I feel like I really want to cry and like I'm feeling really emotional and I'm feeling really upset, but I'm trying to fight back those tears and I'm trying to stuff them down, that's where the suffering is, because I'm not just honoring my experience that I'm feeling sad and that my body is trying to release through the tears in my eyes, because that's a way that we release emotion, through things like tears, through things like yawns, through things like even like burps, and like there's different like forms of quote unquote purges that our body is releasing through. So you may notice, if any of you have tried that somatic workout I linked you to in the Facebook group, you may notice a lot of yawning. Some may even notice like a little bit more of a release, like maybe some tears do come up. Whatever it may be, this is all just a form of release. And when we can start to allow our body to release in the way that it's trying to release, it's trying to get that energy out, right? So that it's not being stored, then we really start to feel that difference. But if I'm trying to stuff down the tears, if I'm feeling really sad and I'm like, okay, I don't feel like it's an appropriate time to cry, or I've just got to get on with my life right now, just not now, and I'm stuffing that down, that's where the suffering is. Whereas if I let those tears come up and out, often within like minutes, I'm like, okay, I feel better now. I feel more regulated now. That energy has been able to flow through me. And now I can, if I want to find a lesson, or if I do need to go back and do something, just get on with things, then I can do that too. But just seeing where the resistance is what causes the suffering. And when we can really make friends with our emotions, and learn not to fear them anymore, because they can feel scary. And there are some big emotions, and there's no doubt many of us have felt lots of big emotions in our life. I would say all of us. There's always going to be those ups and those downs in our lives. And we can hold them. We've held them before. And even though it can feel really difficult in those moments, even though it can feel really hard, when we are able to be with them, it actually does get easier, and we can actually learn to start to find beauty in them. And I mentioned a quote that my friend shared with me recently, that bliss is any emotion fully felt. And this really resonated with me when I heard him say it, because there have been times where I have been feeling really angry, and I've actually been feeling really like, because I haven't tried to resist it, or I haven't tried to change it, I've just surrendered and I've allowed that anger to be there, and I've punched a pillow, and I actually felt really fulfilled. And I did feel that bliss because I was like accepting that and like honoring that part of me that was feeling that particular emotion. And same with things like grief, and even grief in itself. I never remember how to properly word this, but like grief is just love without a place to go, right? So when we lose someone, it's a sign of how much we loved them. So if we can actually just like start to reframe grief and be like, wow, yes, this feeling is really difficult and I'm feeling so sad and I miss them so much. But that level of grief we're feeling is also a representation of the amount of love we had for them. And that love doesn't have that place to go anymore. And of course, there's going to be that sadness. Of course, there's going to be that grief. So just learning to see the beauty in these things as well, and learning to be with ourselves through these. And this is a big thing when it comes to really cultivating deep self-love, which is an absolute game changer, is the more that we can learn to be with ourselves and hold ourselves through these things, the more we can learn to trust ourselves. And I spoke about safety in the nervous system call, the blissful relaxation call, a couple of days ago. And this is another way that we can create safety within our body. When we learn to sit with ourselves and sit with our emotions, and we show ourselves that we've got our own backs and we can get through it, rather than trying, like, being scared and trying to shy away from our emotions. So really, really big game changer when it comes to this emotional side of things. Yeah, I've personally seen how much it has absolutely transformed my life. I know for much of my life, I did suppress my emotions and I didn't know how to handle them. And I would turn to things like emotional eating or like scrolling social media or movies to distract myself. And there's a time and a place for those distractions as well. Sometimes we do just need to distract, especially when there are those bigger emotions and we're learning to feel those and learning to become more comfortable with those, or if we've reached our capacity. Then yeah, like there's no shame in reaching for those distraction techniques. But it's also like starting to cultivate this relationship with our emotions and therefore deepening that self-trust and that comfort within ourselves and that feeling of safety, because we know we're safe when those things do come up. We're not trying to hide from them. We're not trying to push them down. Yeah, so really, really big piece. And I've actually drawn a little model, which I realize it's backwards because Zoom flips the camera around, but you'll be able to get a gist for those that are watching this. So when it comes to embodied health, there's multiple layers. And often when we think of health, we think of the physical layer. We think of like how we feel and how we look, and we think of the healthy habits like food, movement, hydration, sleep. What's the other one? Relaxation. So we think of those kinds of things. We think about, yeah, those healthy habits and more of that physical aspect of like how we feel, how we look. That's one layer of health. And this is what I call the embodied health model. So it's an upside down triangle. And up the top, we often refer to and think of physical health as the main thing. However, there are also multiple layers of health. So we've got our mental health. That is obviously linked to our physical health. And when we're supporting our health, that impacts our mental health and vice versa. And this is why these are all linked. And it's why we can't ignore any one of these areas, because if we ignore either our physical, mental, or emotional health, the other ones can't fully be realized. We can't fully embody the other ones because there's always going to be something not quite right, right? So we've got the physical, then there's the mental, as I've mentioned. So this is how we feel mentally, like our mental health, our happiness, our mindset is a big part of mental health as well. So it's not just like, do we have good/bad? And I say that in quotation marks because again, everything's subjective. It's nothing means anything till we give it meaning. Is it a bad thing that we have anxiety? It's neutral. It's actually something that we can support through various lifestyle and different practices. So when it comes to mental health, it's that side of it, but it's also things like our mindset. Like, is our mind working with us or is our mind working against us? Do we have an empowered mindset or are we having like a bit of a victim mindset? Where's our mindset kind of sitting? And again, there's no right or wrong here. And sometimes we're going to drop into that victim mentality. And that's a beautiful opportunity for us to remember that we are the creators and we get to choose differently. And we get to cultivate that empowered mindset. And that comes over time, especially because for a lot of us, we do have that inner critic that runs rampant. And so learning to reprogram those neural pathways and learning to be kinder to ourselves, it's a practice. And that all comes back to that mental health side of things and that mindset side of things. The mental health side of things is also where we start to look at our subconscious mind and working with our subconscious mind. And in our subconscious mind, that's where a lot of our beliefs lie as well. So I also put beliefs under the mental health pillar of this embodied health model. And I really believe it's so important to have our beliefs working for us, because our beliefs end up being like a blueprint for the life that we create. And if we believe certain things, that's what we start to see in the world, right? And whether we believe we can or we can't, we're right. And this is a Henry Ford quote, I believe. And I love that quote because it's a beautiful example of when we believe in ourselves, we can do anything. And when we don't believe in ourselves, we'll find reasons that we can't do the things. So we always kind of like are creating based on our beliefs. And this is what I mean as well when I say that our beliefs create our reality. So really taking a look at those beliefs that we hold within our subconscious mind and starting to change those to more positive and empowering ones, because then when we believe differently, we'll see differently. And also identity. That also goes under the mental health side of things because this is to do with our subconscious mind. So how do we identify? Do we identify as someone who prioritizes our health? Do we identify as someone who is happy, who is healthy? Or do we identify as someone who's always sick? Or do we identify as someone who is disempowered? Or do we have kind of like that victim identity that I've mentioned? So just starting to notice and see where your identity lies. And identity is one of the deepest levels of behavioral change. And when we are trying to create healthy habits or support our health, when we can work on this identity level and start to see ourselves as that version of ourselves, so as our healthiest self, and start to act as that version of us, it really can start to shift. Because when we start to be that version of us, we end up doing and having everything that that version of us would do. So this is the be, do, have model. And I'm not going to go fully into this, but essentially what the be, do, have model is we often approach it the have, do, be. So when I have more time, then I'll do the things that I know that I need to do for my health. So that's have time, do the things that I need to do for my health, and then I'll be healthy, right? So we're waiting, that's almost like that victim mentality where it's like, well, I don't have time now. So when I have the time, then I'll do the thing. So we're a victim to our circumstances ultimately. Whereas if we flip that and we start seeing like, okay, well, if I'm my healthiest self, what would I be doing? And then therefore, we do have, then therefore, what would I have? So flipping that round and starting at the identity level. So one identity I like to use as an example is being a runner. If I believe that I'm a runner, then what does a runner do? I go out and I run. And even if I'm unfit and I'm working my way up and I'm still quite slow, I can still believe that I'm a runner. And I can prove that to myself by consistently showing up as a runner and being like, yeah, a runner would go for a run this morning, or a runner would run a couple of times a week, or a runner would enter themselves into a half marathon. And we can start to utilize different identities to serve us, to support us in getting to where we want to be. And being where we are, being that version of us where we are, and therefore the other things will fall into place. Because let me tell you, if we keep saying, when I have more time, when I have more money, when I have less responsibilities, when I have, insert our excuses, right? If we always keep saying when I have, we're never going to have it because we have to make it. We have to create it. There's always going to be a billion things that we can do with our time. There's always going to be so many things that we can spend our money on. It's about what we value. What do we truly value? And if we value health, then we make the time. If we value health, then we invest the money. If we value health, then we stop letting those excuses get the better of us. So yeah, this is less related to emotional health. So I'm going to move on to the emotional layer of the embodied health, but this is all very interlinked ultimately. And as you can see, as I mentioned in the first day, we're always going to be very holistic in these talks. So we've got that mental health, which is the mindset, beliefs, identity, and just like how is our mental state essentially. And then we've got the emotional health. So emotional health is down at the tip of this upside down pyramid because it's often at the core and it's not necessarily the most obvious one, right? Like we can see our physical health and we can feel our physical health. We can definitely feel our emotional health, whether we're aware of it or not. If we're suppressing a lot of it, we might not be as aware of it. But often if we are suppressing it, we'll feel those things like more anxiety, or like we're trying to keep Pandora's box closed because we're so afraid of what might come out. So we're feeling like we always having to put a lid on things. So emotional health, it's less obvious, but it's there and it's at the core. And when we can work with emotional health, it ripples up, just like when we work with physical health, when we get enough sleep, it ripples down. So that emotional health, that consists of things like being friends with our emotion and starting to really acknowledge it for what it is. Energy in motion, it's there with some sort of message for us. And it wants to move through us. It's a part of us telling us something. So if I'm feeling angry, maybe it's because someone crossed my boundaries. Or in my case today, if I'm feeling grumpy, it's ultimately because underneath that, I'm feeling sad because I didn't get as much sleep, which I really value. And when something I value is like I isn't happening, or the expectations around that aren't happening, then I feel sad and therefore grumpy, right? Expectations is another thing. Maybe our emotions are coming up because we had certain expectations that weren't met. So maybe there's disappointment, maybe there's sadness, maybe there's defeat, whatever kind of emotions come up. So that's another example. Maybe maybe I'm feeling sad because something's happened that upsets me, and I've got a wound there that's been touched upon, or something sad has happened and it's just valid to feel sad. And that's just the message that, yeah, there's sadness present because it's something we care about a lot, right? Usually when we're sad about something, it's something we care about. So just starting to see why these emotions are there, starting to tune into those messages, but first getting comfortable feeling them and being with them. Because in being with those emotions, you are being with different parts of yourself and you are being with yourself. And I cannot tell you how healing this is, because every time we suppress our emotions, we're also suppressing and abandoning a part of ourselves. And that's can be really difficult. So really just starting to heal that relationship with emotions and feel your feelings and utilize different emotional processing techniques to support yourself with that. So I've mentioned a couple here, something like crying, something like punching pillows or screaming, things like that. Obviously doing these in safe spaces and not at people. And then you've got like things like movement. That's a beautiful way to move energy, right? We spoke about that even with the somatic exercises that we've been speaking about. So there's countless ways to work with our emotions and process our emotions. And this is something else that I include in my programs is emotional toolkits for how to actually navigate these different emotions and helping us start to really practice and lean into these as well. Because at the start, it can feel weird. I know the first time I punched a pillow, it wasn't that many years ago now. I was like, I feel really silly right now. But then you can also have a little laugh at yourself. And then you see that the emotions just fluctuate too, right? Like one moment it was anger and now I'm laughing at myself because I'm punching a pillow. Or same with screaming. There was a time where I felt so constricted that I couldn't even scream if I tried. I was like, no, I can't scream. I've got to keep this in. That's not acceptable behavior. But then I just like let out a primal scream and like started to activate my voice. And it's activated my voice in so many other areas of my life too. And I saw how suppressed my voice was. So this is very linked to our freedom of expression as well. When it comes to expressing our emotions, it's also very linked to our expression in ourselves and how comfortable we feel in our authentic expression. Oh, I just had another thought drop in, but it's escaped me. It's obviously not important. If I'm meant to remember it, I'll remember it. Oh, yes, I remember it. Perfect. So the more we can lean into those uncomfortable emotions, the more we can experience the other side of the spectrum. So we want these feelings of like happiness and joy and excitement and love, right? But if we're capping ourselves on the other side of feeling the sadness and the anger and the grief and all the other kinds of less comfortable emotions, then we're also capping ourselves on the other side. So the deeper we go into the depths, the higher we can soar into the heights and vice versa. So just noticing, like, and I've noticed since kind of like unlocking this new level of being able to feel my emotions and feeling safer and safer with feeling my emotions, I have felt such higher states of bliss and ecstasy and pleasure and joy. And it's just been so beautiful because, yes, there have been really what felt like really difficult times in feeling all of the sadness and the grief and the anger and those more difficult, heavy emotions. But it's like such a beautiful payoff. And like I said, the more we learn to become comfortable with those uncomfortable emotions as well, they actually start to feel blissful too. So really want to encourage you to start to just see where you may be suppressing those emotions and see where this is impacting your health in many ways. Because if we're carrying this emotional baggage, we're going to feel tighter. We're going to feel more fatigued from that energy level. And I will also mention that the emotional health side of things encompasses that energetic health side of things. And at the root of many different ailments and conditions, there's always those energetic reasons. And they're often very linked to emotions as well. So the more we can start to work on that emotional and energetic level too, the more we'll see the benefits in the mental and the physical health side of things. So really start to lean in and work with your emotions and learn to tune into them. And yes, it can feel scary, and I'm here to support if you want any extra guidance. But just know that one tool you can always draw upon, whether it's in the lowest lows or the highest highs, is your breath. Come back to your breath, because your breath helps you feel safe. And it can feel scary in those uncomfortable emotions. And sometimes it can feel scary in those really high emotions too, right? Things like emotional eating don't just happen when we're feeling uncomfortable emotions. It can also happen when we're feeling an uncomfortable amount of joy and excitement, because it's like, oh, I don't know how to hold this much happiness right now. So I need to kind of like self-soothe through food. So that's one layer of why it's so important to address our emotions. And as I've mentioned a couple of times here, if we don't address our emotions and we're instead distracting ourselves from them or protecting ourselves from them, that can manifest in unhealthy behaviors like the emotional eating. And this is why, until we learn to deal with our emotions and until we cultivate this relationship with them and start to process them and move the energy through us, until we do that, we're going to continue to turning towards protection strategies or distraction strategies or self-soothing strategies like the emotional eating. So we can't overcome emotional eating until we really learn to work with our emotions. And the same goes for any other addictive tendencies, like scrolling on our phone and getting stuck in those scroll holes, like binge watching television shows when we're distracting ourselves from things, like other addictive things, even like sugar can start from there as well, like sugar addictions, because often that can come from that emotional place originally, and then it becomes an addiction, and then it becomes harder to shake. But yeah, there's more, like obviously alcoholism or drugs, like all of these addictions, the more we can like lean in and work with our emotions and heal any underlying trauma that our body is holding, and also regulate our nervous system. These two are very linked: nervous system regulation and emotional health, because you'll notice when your nervous system is fried and dysregulated, you're more likely to be more emotional, and vice versa. And same with the physical health side of things. When you're less healthy and vibrant and thriving, your emotional health takes a hit as well. So like I mentioned today, I'm feeling tired. I noticed that grumpiness. I also noticed this morning I was feeling extra touchy, and there was like a little thing and I was like starting to get teary, and I was like, what's going on? That's like, normally that would be a little thing, but because my physical health and my sleep, I'd had less of it, I was able to observe and be like, yeah, it's literally what I'm teaching. It's when we're not supporting the physical health, it impacts the mental health, and we are going to be more emotional health, and we're going to be more emotional, and vice versa. If we're not dealing with the emotions, then we're going to be going towards some more of those unhealthy behaviors, and therefore it's going to impact the physical health. And then it's like that kind of negative cycle, because then it's like, okay, it's impacting the physical health, and then it's impacting the emotional health and the mental health. And it's just like we can get stuck in a spiral there. So that is all I have to say for today about emotional health. This is another topic that I could talk so much about, and I do inside my programs. But for today, I feel like I've already overloaded you all, depending where you are on your emotional health journey as well. This might all be new to you, or you might be like, yeah, I freaking love punching pillows and it's the best. I feel so liberated now that I feel my emotions. So your simple action step for today is to simply journal on how you're feeling at some time today. You might be feeling really happy and excited, and I just want you to journal into like, what are the sensations present? How are you feeling? And what does that actually mean? And yeah, just like journal on that, just so that you can get a little bit more in touch with that emotion and give it some time and space. So it might be a quote unquote positive emotion. It might be one of those comfortable and pleasurable emotions, or it might be if there's a bit of sadness present. Maybe this call brings up a little bit of sadness for you. Just journaling on that and being like, okay, I'm feeling sad. Why am I feeling sad? Oh, I've realized I actually don't feel my feelings, and I am like putting them to the side, and I can see now how that's impacting me, and I feel sad about that. And just talking about that, where do you feel that sadness? And just being with it, right? And remember, always come back to your breath. Deep breaths, it'll help you feel safe. It helps with nervous system regulation. It supports with moving that emotion too. So yeah, enjoy the journaling. I'll pop the homework task in the Facebook group. Also double check and see where you're sitting on that scale. So refer to your wheel of health today and see, all right, where do I feel I'm sitting currently with my emotional health? Is it something that I'm feeling really comfortable with? Or is it something that I'm actually now aware that needs a little bit more love from me? Just check the chat. You are so welcome, Melanie. Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And yes, thank you for reminding me. Tomorrow is a break from New Year Nourished You while I will be facilitating an event. And I will see you all on Monday morning at 7 a.m. Thank you so much. Bye for now.